We mentioned the draw rate of Denis Lazavik, and we're seeing a few of them here so far.
But it wasn't his typical draw, because it felt like he maybe lost control of the position a bit and then still hung in there. So I think from his perspective, he's probably okay with that result. He didn't quite get the push he wanted, and then Magnus let him back in the game.
Yeah, as you know, any good chess game ends with both players upset at the result.
Lazavik's the type of player, after a loss, he's not coming out the next game guns a-blazing.
That's right.
Still sticks to his style. A draw might be a way to build back some momentum, some confidence, and just stay in the match. It's still close enough.
Yeah, no, we talked about this in the pregame as well, just how consistent Denis is, and that is what you have to do in the Speed Chess Championship. Stay in the match, because anything can happen. One blunder can change things. So what we've got here is a new position, as Magnus with the white pieces certainly has a lot of experience in these structures, Eric, from both sides, and knight d2 indicates the idea perhaps playing pawn to f4 for white to strike at that center, but sometimes you can also play on the queen side as white, maybe like a b4 plan, pushing that pawn from a4 to a5 just to restrict and prevent black from being solid with a move like b6.
Yeah, f4, as you mentioned, the queen side push, both opportunities. I actually played Magnus recently on the white side of this, and I can say it didn't end very well. These are some slow positions from both sides. Black would like to play f5 at some point. You have the bishop pair. You'd like to open that up, but you have to be very careful when you play f5, because the e5 pawn could become critically weak, especially you see this rook on e1. There is some potential. When you play f4, that's a good way to improve the bishop. I actually thought Denis was going to play the knight to e6 as a means of defending against f4 and stopping some of the ways that white would open up the position.
Yeah, that's a common one, because not only do you stop f4, you also head to the d4 square. A move that white is not that interested in playing is the move c3, because it controls d4, but you permanently weaken that d pawn. So sometimes black brings the knight to e6 to tempt white to play that c3 move.
Oh, I think that should be played, but here you need to clear the e6 square.
Yep.
Bishop f7 might feel passive, but if you give up your bishop pair, that's another tough decision.
Yeah, it's basically, you're not even just giving up the bishop, but you're kind of trading it for the knight on d2, in effect, because the knight's just going to recapture, and you're not really achieving that much. Here is a very similar idea, trying to encourage c3, because knight b4 could be annoying to deal with.
Yeah, white, if you're looking at this position from white's perspective, wants to keep the pawn on c2. Otherwise, any c3 really weakens the center and the d3 square. So Magnus maybe will react with knight e3 after knight b4. But on the other hand, how does white push here? If you play, you want to maybe time e5 properly, maybe queen g3. You just have to be careful, because even though this bishop on g7 is blocked right now, it's just one or two moves away from this being a very open position, and maybe things aren't timed properly.
Yeah, I like your call of queen g3. It gets off the f file, which makes the move e5 a little more desirable. And also after e5, should black capture or maybe push, there was bishop g5 in the position. So that's why black has also sidestepped with queen d7. If you could trade those bishops as well, potentially queen e3 and bishop h6, that's another idea to just soften the king side. But we're going to see a lot of maneuvering in this one, and I'm still wondering how that c-pawn is going to be defended. If black plays knight to b4, probably going to see either rook c1 or knight e3 in order to watch that pawn temporarily.
Yeah, I think knight e3. I wasn't sure after knight b4, rook c1, if you can play knight a2 and then knight back to
That's
b4.
Right.
I'm not sure about that. Probably not.
And knight e3, g5. You have to start considering that bishop does not have many squares. So perhaps there is this knight a2, almost repetition available if white doesn't want to play knight a3.
Big thing for Denis here. He's down about 30 seconds. Knight a2, I was tempted by that. Okay, we do see the repetition.
Now he's calculated something here, obviously, because g5 is quite a risky.
Fortunately, yeah.
Bishop c7, rook c8, bishop d6. So you clear a path for that bishop, even though it looks like there's not one available.
And then after you clear the path, if it gets attacked anymore, you might have e5 cementing it.
Yep, and the knight can rejoin the c4 square. And the move g5 for black is not good. right? At its core, G5 is a move you would never want to play. So you can only do it if you're 100% sure that you're trapping that bishop. In this case, not only does it not work, but I think Denis is also not that risk taker.
Well, B5, this is a blunder, and it's just the same idea we looked at. The problem is C5 is hanging after the pawn pushed to B5. So after bishop C7, rook moves, bishop D6. You're either losing an exchange or a pawn.
Yeah, in the end, it was actually a more significant error than the move G5. And look at how quickly that bishop just rerouted, take the pawn back to B2, where it puts pressure on F6. Black now has to move the rook back to defend. It is all white in this position. The C4 square is also under white's control.
Yeah, F6 is the most important pawn in the game. I think Magnus, with H4, he's indicating, I'm not worried about A4. I can attack the king side. The queen, investing that much time away from the king, it's going to pay off for white. And just long term, this knight on A6 feels like Denis lost a lot of time maneuvering the knight.
Yep.
Has to find a way to come back in this game. And maybe trading queens is practical. A lot of times you don't do that when you're down material. But I think he recognizes with the queens on the board, maybe his king is not in a good position. I'm going to trade and play an endgame. Yeah,
this could help. And the move G4 is permanently stopping all F5 ideas, and also has this plan of playing G5 for white. You play that, you get that bishop trade that you're looking to get, and perhaps control of some dark squares. So let's say how he handles this position, but honestly, Eric, there's no rush. Everything is defended. That knight on E3 is a hero at the moment.
Yeah, everything's defended, and it feels like Magnus has a few moves ready to be played, like rook E to F2. At some point, knight D2 to C4. Ways to improve the position.
So knight D2 to C4 here, because the E3 knight is everything. If that knight gets captured or moves, C2 falls, G4 falls. So you have to keep a knight on E3. So that's why knight C4 was played. Should the bishop capture on C4, look at how the rook on E2 now defends the C pawn. You can recapture nicely with the knight. So really great maneuvering, getting the pieces to the right squares.
Yeah, we look at this position. What can Denis attack? Everything is nicely covered. And under a minute, there's a 2-minute time advantage. This is close to being lost.
It is. F6 is hanging in this position. One of the reasons that I think Denis has gone for this is because bishop takes on E3, puts us in an opposite bishop situation. But Eric, we're not close to a draw just yet. It is all Magnus. And in terms of the current position, you got F6 hanging. You could even push forward with D4 and D5. But I like the counterplay with C4. I think this is a good practical attempt.
Yeah, if you don't play C4, you're just permanently defending F6. That's passive. It's not going to work. C4, make things a bit sharper. You know you're likely behind either way, but this forces Magnus to find some tougher moves. And I think D4 is generally how you want to react as white.
Yep.
Grab the passed pawn. You can push to D5 later on. And we're expecting C3 from Denis.
Yep.
Something like bishop A3, but...
critical moment after C4, how you react to a move like this. If the knights get traded, we really do get closer to those draw tendency positions with opposite colored bishops on the board, but you need to know what's coming next. So if D4, black might play the move C3, and then there's bishop A3, another pin against that knight on the side of the board that Magnus is counting on.
If Magnus takes on F6, that's okay, and I think that's pretty safe. Probably a 2-result game. D4, probably the best move here, but the position gets a bit sharper. And I see some positions where maybe Denis plays A5 and at some point wants to target the A4 pawn as a means of counterplay.
Yeah, starting with bishop A3, black needs to capture just so there's no C3 move, which might win that knight. And instead, we're getting a very similar position, but I think Magnus didn't want the risk of a black pawn on C3, so just traded the C pawns first or chose a variation where Denis had to play this way.
Well, if I'm playing black here, Amon, I think I'm trying to target the A4 pawn. There's nothing else that's loose right now.
Yeah, completely agree. A4 being on a light square.
And there's not many pieces you can use. The rook on F8 is still tied to the F6 pawn.
There you go, bishop B3.
He just has to play moves. I mean, just down a minute and change. Can't afford to get under a few seconds and with a sharp position.
No, not at all. This is a position that will require some technique as well. So bishop B3, rook C3, I think this is the right way to play.
I think you can double the rooks here. Oh, rook e8. There's an f5 move if you move your king up. Wait, I think Magnus's blunder. Rook takes e4.
You can just take it.
And then you can take rook e takes e3.
Magnus,
just a massive mistake.
His hand is in the air. He can't believe what he's just allowed because, first of all, he has to compose and not end up worse. But this is just a huge error. Let's see if he can pull this position back after rook takes b4, rook takes d5. We should be headed towards a drop. That outside a pawn, Eric, and better king placement for white, still a little bit tricky.
And the time situation. Even though this is a theoretical draw, you might be between 2 or 3 moves and you don't have time to actually recall which one it is.
The counterplay with black's f-pawn is going to be really helpful here. This has definitely been a mistake, an error from Magnus, but still, you know, we're used to seeing him get to this position without a mistake before and turn it into a win. So let's see if he can do it here.
Yeah, there's a couple approaches. White runs the king over to the queen side to support that pawn, or something like this, where you get the king out, you get split past pawns and the king is out of position.
And that's how quick it happens. You blink and you'll miss it. Magnus Carlsen now has the pawn all the way on h7, and if you bring the king to g6, it's no help, Eric. You can't capture the pawn because the a-pawn goes all the way, and Magnus wins that game after initially